The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews has been on the ground in the Holy Land for more than 40 years, providing food, shelter, and safety to those in need. They deliver meals to the elderly, place bomb shelters in vulnerable places, bulletproof ambulances, and donate life-saving equipment to hospitals. And that's only scratching the surface of their work. I urge you to join me in supporting the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews in this life-saving work. To help the fellowship continue this urgent work, please go online to levinforthefellowship.org, Levin for thefellowship.org, and please donate today. It's a tax-deductible donation. That's levinforthefellowship.org, Levin for thefellowship.org.
Anti-Semitism incidents soared 140% last year in the United States.
Bomb threats to Jewish synagogues and buildings are up tenfold.
There's a rhetoric of elimination of Jews, of hatred of Jews that vilifies Jews.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free! Hezbollah! Hezbollah! Kill another Zionist now!
Mark Levin and the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews bring you On the Frontlines.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second edition of our brand new podcast, On the Frontlines, with our dear friend Yael Eckstein, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, Ifcj. Now, you folks know I love this organization. I talk about it on radio all the time. You see them on TV. You see the incredible work that they're doing on the ground every day. They're in the thick of it. Yael Eckstein is, in fact, a citizen of the state of Israel. She lives there, and she sees exactly what's going on around her. It's a great pleasure to have you here, my friend.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you. And I have to give the caveat that I always give on interviews that I'm here in Israel. And so if a code red siren starts sounding, I'm going to have to put down the phone and run to my shelter, which has happened a few times. But hopefully that won't happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, I understand. When we were there in April, there were a lot of code reds. Anyway, let's get started here. And one of the things we're going to do today in our podcast is we're going to take what they call a deep dive into what has been, and very, very troubling and very, very, really crazy, is 4,000 years of hatred for Jews. I mean, really since the birth of Judaism in Shiloh and elsewhere. I mean, it just seems so, and it's almost, and you see it in the Bible too, yeah?
It's something that I think we all are so alarmed by today, but we forget that anti-Semitism is as old as the Jewish people. And like you said, it starts directly in the Bible. We see this from Genesis, where the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt by Pharaoh. And we see how God reached out his arm and provided their amazing, incredible, miraculous escape. Then we think it's over, but no, we go to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the first temple, which led to the exile. We know the story, all of us, of wicked Haman, who tried to have the Jews destroyed by Xerxes in Persia. And then even after the Jewish people returned to the Holy Land, when the second temple was built, they again faced attacks because of their religion. You could go through history. In every single generation, there's more and more of these attacks against the Jewish people simply because we're Jewish. In the 2nd century BCE, the Greek Empire's desire to destroy Jewish religion led to the story of Hanukkah that we all know. This is the story of the Maccabees' amazing victory, the small against the many, and of course the miracle of the oil that they were able to light the menorah that we continue to this day. But then after that, the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem came, and they wanted to destroy, once again, the Jewish people from being sovereign in their land. And so after that, the Jewish people were dispersed, and you'd think that maybe the anti-Semitism would be over then, but no, it continued. We all know about genocide, ethnic cleansing, and this is what the Jews have always faced, from blood libels to forced conversions to inquisitions. And so I think when you look over the past 2,000 years, Mark, you can even go back to 4,000 years, you can see that anti-Semitism has always been called something else, depending on who the evil forces in the world are at that time and what their excuses for hating the Jewish people. But it's always been there. And so what we see today is in many ways not new. It's the same anti-Semitism as all those different situations that I've named through the years. But what is very new, and I'll tell you, Mark, this is what gives me so much hope, is that today we're not alone. I look around, and through my work with International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, I see that actually after one community after another have turned their backs on the Jewish people and have once again given into this evil of anti-Semitism, there's one group who hasn't done that, who's learned from history. And that's so many of our Christian friends today. You know, one of my board members, Reverend Johnny Moore, he says that there are 700 million evangelical Christians around the world who stand with Israel. And despite all of the pressure for them to turn their backs on us, their support for the Jewish people, their commitment to standing shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish people, their commitment to learning from history and not repeating those mistakes has never been stronger. So, yeah, like you said, anti-Semitism isn't new. It's from the Bible leading up to today, but we are seeing encouraging new trends that I think both of us are witness to in the most incredible way.
And you point out this history, and it is a long history, and yet those societies that were trying to exterminate the Jews, they don't exist anymore. The original Egyptian society, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, they're all gone. So Judaism has outlived all these empires. I remember Dory Gold once telling me this, very important, I'm just telling the audience, very important statesman who's worked with Israel and America for so long. He told me that all these genocides against the Jews, if they hadn't happened, there'd be as many Jews as there are Chinese. There'd be 1.5 billion Jews on the face of the earth right now. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. What I think about when I hear that is how the Jewish people haven't even gotten to the number of Jews from before the Holocaust. We haven't even gotten back to that number. So to think about what you're saying is just mind-boggling. It shows what a long-term and cumulative effect all of these attacks have had on the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm. It's just so horrendous. And, of course, our Jewish brothers and sisters in Israel are fighting the very same fight right now. They're surrounded and fighting for their survival and so forth and so on. The support of the Christian community around the world, and especially in the United States, is so vital. Is so vital to Israel and Judaism, isn't it?
It is something that cannot be overstated. The fact that we now have Christian friends who, despite all of the pressures, all of the trends, are saying we've learned from history and we won't make that mistake again. Because we see, Mark, anti-Semitism and hatred has always existed, but in the 20th century it turned from a hatred against our religion, our tradition, to a hatred of our very being, of our blood. After Germany's defeat in World War I, the Jews were blamed, as you know, and even lumped in with the communists who had taken over Russia. And this blame, combined with the very false scientific theories like eugenics, now are the target of Jewish blood. And so what I see is that the Nazis' goal was to exterminate those with any Jewish blood, which they implemented the spread across Europe before and during World War II, where my grandfather was in Germany and miraculously escaped, but his whole family was killed. My father-in-law, Holocaust survivor, his family was killed. So when we talk about how if it weren't for all of these different pogroms and attacks and Holocaust on the Jewish people could be as big as the people of China. And instead, many of your listeners might actually be surprised here. We're around 15 million people total. Like there's a comedian that I just saw who was saying the Jewish people are 0.5 of 1% of the world population. So if you had around that, we'd be zero. We don't exist. And so it's incredible what we've been able to achieve despite all of this. But we have to remember that it's just being Jewish that bothers the anti-Semites out there. For the Nazis, it didn't matter how religious a Jewish person was, if they were secular, if they weren't even religious at all, if they had even a parent who wasn't Jewish and they didn't identify as Jewish. The Nazis didn't care. They sent them straight to the gas chambers, right alongside the observant Jews. And so none of it mattered, not the economic status, not their political status, not their patriotism, not their education. None of it mattered. If you had Jewish blood, then you were going to be killed by the Nazis. And that's where we saw 6 million Jews put into ghettos, deported, exterminated. And so I think, Mark, for me, the Holocaust underscored what decades of Zionist belief had already fought for. It highlighted that we need a Jewish state where Jewish people could live freely for their faith, for who they are. And it's incredible to see how the Christian community and so many others who understand the need for this, both spiritually and practically, are standing alongside us when we're once again in our fight for survival.
Beautiful. If people want to make a tax-deductible gift and support your incredible efforts, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews on the ground, feeding people, helping them with housing, helping them with safe rooms and so forth and so on, every single day on the ground where the money goes, where do they go?
Well, thank you so much. I could tell you that these donations make a huge difference. They can go to www.ifcj.org. That's International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And we're literally on the ground saving lives every single day. Just yesterday, there was a terror attack where a bus went into a huge group of people standing next to a bus stop. A terrorist was driving the bus and banged into them. People killed, over 40 injured. It was the fellowship volunteers that we gave them emergency vehicles who were the first on the scene doing CPR and saving lives. And just today, there were many, many sirens in northern Israel as rockets were launched into cities, and school children went into the bomb shelters that the fellowship placed outside of their school stop, their bus stop, which saved their lives. And so every day we're seeing new and new accounts and firsthand stories of people saying, wow, Christians, Jews, and others who stand with Israel have saved my life through the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and the programs that we are implementing on the ground every single day according to the need.
Yeah, thank God you folks are there. We're going to take a little break. We're going to be right back with our dear friend Yael Eckstein. I'm Mark Levin, and this is On the Front Lines, our brand new podcast. We'll be right back. Next week, Americans will vote in one of the most consequential elections in American history. And no matter what happens, we know that the support of Americans like you means so much to the people of Israel, especially now. This past year, not only have we seen the war rage on the Holy Land, but we've also seen an alarming rise in anti-Semitism. This is why I'm a proud partner of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. They've been building bridges between Christians and Jews for 40 years, and since that time, they've been on the ground helping the vulnerable and helping to provide security for Jews in both Israel and Ukraine. Thank you for your support during this critical time. Your tax-deductible gift helps the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews provide food, necessities, and better security to those most in need. Standing with Israel and the Jewish people has never meant so much. Please go online to levinforthefellowship.org and make your tax-deductible gift today. That's levinforthefellowship.org, Levin, Levin, for thefellowship.org. Welcome back, folks. We're with our friend Yael Eckstein, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, which does vital work in Israel. The Holy Land for Jews, the Holy Land for Christians too. I mean, when you go to Israel and you go to the Old City and you go to the City of David, there it is, the Bible. You can literally touch it. You can see where these incredible people throughout Jewish and Christian history, where they lived, where they walked, where they prayed, where their followers were. It's just incredible. It's really there. And what I wanted to ask you, Yael Eckstein, you're there, so people really get a feel for this. When Israel's under attack, it's a state of war, You're talking about all this terrorism that's occurring inside the state of Israel. It's every single day. And then the attacks from the outside and the pressures from the world and the international organizations as anti-Semitism spreads. We're talking about real human beings here, right, that are leaving their families to go to war, many of whom are not regular army. They come out of the cafes, they're plumbers, they're electricians, they're whatever they are. And so they're literally leaving their family. Their family has to strive for themselves. You're talking about moving tens of thousands of Israeli citizens from part of the country where the missiles are flying in from Hezbollah. They have to be resettled. I don't think people understand in this country, because it's not reported, the extent of the economic impact and the familial impact on the Jewish people.
Mark, it is affecting every single one of us. I was woken up just a few days ago, me and my family, at 5 o'clock in the morning with the code red siren saying we have 90 seconds to make it to the shelter. I had to wake up my 4 kids, make sure we all got in the shelter, decide whether we take our 2 dogs or not. There's time to bring them in the shelter and get the door closed before the rocket exploded overhead. I went to a restaurant yesterday to pick up food, and there was a sign on the window, "We're not open today because our chef was called up to reserve duty. We have to find another chef. Hopefully we'll be open tomorrow." My cousin, my baby cousin, he has 4 kids himself, and he's in the world of finance, very successful, very respected. Well, he's right now in Lebanon because he was called up to reserve duty. My best friend has 3 kids who are right now in either Gaza or Lebanon protecting Israel. And so it's affecting everyone in an emotional, in a practical, in a financial way. And so it's really bridging this resilience of Israel. We're still smiling. We're still continuing on with life. We're still doing everything we can to bring whatever sort of normalcy we're able to bring, coupled with the realization we're fighting a war for our survival. Since October 7th, there have been over 30,000 rockets, missiles, and drones launched into Israel. Israel is the size of New Jersey. We had over 13,000 missiles launched from Gaza, over 15,000 missiles and drones launched from Lebanon. We had hundreds of missiles launched from Iran, hundreds from Yemen, even from Syria. 7 fronts, and we're the size of New Jersey. And so I think the world doesn't realize this fight for our survival that we're in and how it's affecting all of us. And not only that, I think the world doesn't realize the evil that we're facing. And it's the same evil Israel is facing that America and the free world is facing. There's a quote that I always think of by Thomas Mann. He said, "Tolerance becomes a crime when it's applied to evil." And Mark, doesn't that sound kind of like what's happening now?
Yes.
We're having so much tolerance towards the evil of the world.
You know, we got a call a couple of days ago. My family is building a small residence in Jerusalem. And the person who's overseeing this is a sweetheart. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy, just easy to deal with. He's an Israeli. And he was contacted by my son about something going on there. And his lady answered the phone and said, Ellie is not going to be able to help for the next 4 or 5 days. We said, why? Because his brother was killed in Lebanon. This is how it goes. This is no joke. And the American press doesn't appreciate it and doesn't report it properly. And in our own country, the rise of anti-Semitism in our colleges and our streets, which goes addressed to some extent but largely unaddressed. This is a huge, huge problem in this country and around the world. And this hatred toward the Jewish state of Israel, a democracy, a peoples who simply want to live in peace, who in fact have made abundant offers to the enemy time and time and time again for peace, land, economic assistance, security assistance, and so forth and so on. It goes to your point, your early point, that this hatred toward the Jews really is something that is an epidemic, especially in the part of the world where Israel is, and it has nothing to do with anything that the Jews in Israel offer or try to do, or the peace branch, or anything of the kind, that there are elements in the world especially in the Middle East, that simply want to obliterate the state of Israel. What are your thoughts about this?
I think you couldn't have said it more spot on and clear. It says in Isaiah that in the last days, good will be called evil and evil will be called good. And you see today people supporting Hamas, calling Sinwar a hero. And I have to say, supporting Hamas because you care about Palestinians is like supporting ISIS because you care about Iraqis. And so here in Israel, we realize that there's always going to be conflict when there are people who want to kill the Jews. The Jews don't want to be killed, and neither side is willing to compromise. But it's important to realize and call it exactly what it is. Just like you said, it's called anti-Semitism. It's not called freeing anyone. It's not good for anyone. And even the moderate Arab countries know this. You know, Mark, in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, they have banned all public displays of support for Palestine, and they consider Hamas a terror organization, to the extent that they deported a Palestinian student for shouting Free Palestine during a graduation ceremony in Abu Dhabi. This is in UAE. And then you look at what's happening on Columbia campus. You look at what's happening on college campuses across America, and you say, what do these moderate Arab countries like Egypt, like Jordan, like the UAE, who have all outlawed and banned public displays of support for Palestine, what do they know that we don't? And then you can get to the root cause of it.
I want to remind you folks that Yael and her people, it's a very efficient organization. It puts as much resources as it can on the ground to go directly to these people who need it. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, many of you have seen them on TV. The work that they do, you've seen prominent Christians who sit on the board who also support the organization, and so many generous Christians and Jews and anybody giving a tax-deductible gift. You go to ifcj.org. That's International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, ifcj.org. We will be right back with our friend Yael Eckstein. Next week, Americans will vote in one of the most consequential elections in American history. And no matter what happens, we know that the support of Americans like you means so much to the people of Israel, especially now. This past year, not only have we seen the war rage on the Holy Land, but we've also seen an alarming rise in anti-Semitism. This is why I'm a proud partner of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. They've been building bridges between Christians and Jews for 40 years. And since that time, they've been on the ground helping the vulnerable and helping to provide security for Jews in both Israel and Ukraine. Thank you for your support during this critical time. Your tax-deductible gift helps the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews provide food, necessities, and better security to those most in need. Standing with Israel and the Jewish people has never meant so much. Please go online to levinforthefellowship.org and make your tax-deductible gift today. That's levinforthefellowship.org, Levin, Levin, for thefellowship.org. Welcome back, everybody. Our wonderful new podcast. You know, I don't have a new podcast with anybody but our friends at International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Why? Because I'm mission-oriented. 100% mission-oriented. Their mission and my mission are the same mission. That's the bottom line. I don't do this for commercial enterprises or anything of the sort. I do this because I'm a believer. And you're believers in this audience like no other audience in the country. It's the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, ifcj.org. You can give them some help. And our program is On the Front Lines. I'm here with Yael Eckstein. You know, Yael, the state of Israel. It's interesting. The state of Israel, the state itself is less than 80 years old. And yet, these are the ancient lands of the Jewish people for 4,000 years. The Jewish people are the indigenous peoples of this location on the face of the earth. And yet the hate for the state of Israel seems to know no bounds.
You know, Mark, if you say that the indigenous people have a right to the land, then the Jews have a right. And if you say, like so many other 80 new countries have been formed around the world since 1900, all of them a clear direct result of wars, if you say that those are the countries who have the right to exist, the ones based on war, then Israel also belongs to the Jews. But no one accepts it, no matter what, even though there's one Jewish country and over 20 countries in the United Arab Union. It doesn't matter because it's not about land. It doesn't matter that Israel's 0.4% of the entire Middle East and that the Arabs have 99.6%. It's not about that. It's about anti-Semitism. And we've always seen that because anti-Semitism is kind of like the mythical creature, the Hydra, which has many heads, that once one type of anti-Semitism is stopped for a time, another head arises, just as hateful and insidious as the last. And so now we see anti-Semitic hatred targeting Israel, the Jewish state, the very place where the Jewish people sought to flee from hatred. The one little place that we said, okay, we won't bother anyone else around the world. We'll be all to ourselves. Just let us live. Let us be good and create patents for the world to thrive, to have better medical care and Nobel Peace Prizes. But it's Israel that the whole world chooses to single out, to question our very existence. Since 1948, international sentiment has often been against the tiny state of Israel simply because they hate Jews. So let's go back for a minute to the beginning. Israel's War of Independence saw us defend ourselves against Arab states on all sides. We had Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen all against us, all attacking us. Israel's enemies still tried to defeat the Jewish state decades later when they saw they couldn't beat us in 1948, in 1950s, in the 1960s, and then, of course, in 1967, the big Six-Day War where they all attacked us. And they didn't like it that Israel kept winning. We didn't want to expand our territory. In 1948, we had a tiny sliver of land, and we were happy with that. But they kept attacking, kind of forcing us to expand our territory so we could protect ourselves. Of course, we had the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and all of these wars that I just mentioned, we haven't had a 10-year period without a war since the establishment of the State of Israel. All of them are waged by outside enemies because the world, not just those enemies, it enables this questioning of our right to exist. From the UN to the EU to the Arab Union, even sometimes in America. And thank God, because Israel has been so victorious, it led to another problem that's not as good. It's a new form of anti-Semitism that you can call terrorism. In the 1970s, Palestinian terrorism began its spread with the PLO. There were skyjackings and terror attacks. There was Black September, the Munich massacre of the Israeli Olympians who were there. Then came the first and second intifadas, where cafes and bus stops were blown up, children being torn apart pieces by suicide bombers. Then came the wars with Hezbollah, Lebanon, and Hamas. Many people think that right now in Lebanon it's our first war against Hezbollah. It's our third. It's our third. And the way the other wars ended was because UN sent a peacekeeping force to make sure Hezbollah, the terrorists, wouldn't get up to Israel's border. And they were zero effective. You can even say that not only did they turn a blind eye to Hezbollah digging tunnels and acquiring weapons on Israel's border, they even hid it from Israel and international forces. And so I guess what I'm saying, Mark, is that October 7th wasn't the beginning. It was just the latest and most serious in Israel's neighbors' coordinated attempts to end the existence of the Jewish people. So I think it's important for people to know the history, to understand that this isn't anti-Israel. This is the modern anti-Semitism. And I can go through example what's happening in the UN with some of the worst human rights violators, such as North Korea and Syria, Iran, and China. Israel has more condemnations than all of those countries combined, and yet Israel is the only democracy. So anti-Semitism, like you're saying, is a real problem. And I think it's time that people learn the history, that people care about the history and the facts. And you, Mark, are on the forefront of enabling your listeners to really be a part of the solution instead of the problem by being equipped with tools to answer these anti-Semitic sentiments that you see everywhere.
Well, I'll tell you what, you guys are doing a fantastic job. And see everywhere, you're right. I mean, the head rabbi in France said within 10 years there won't be any Jews left in France. I mean, you look what goes on in London. You look what goes on in Berlin. All these countries, and you look at some of the elected officials there in Britain and France and elsewhere. You're in Israel. You live in Israel. You're on the ground there. You're doing this podcast from Israel. When you sit there and listen to this in the little state of Israel, all you're trying to do is survive and live your lives and so forth. Do you see the circle getting tighter and tighter? Or, as you said earlier in the podcast, we have Jews around the world and our Christian brothers and sisters in growing numbers who are there to inspire and educate.
Well, that's exactly why the fellowship is on the ground, because we can't rely, Mark, on our governments to be our voice. I hear so many Christians in America, over 100 million evangelical Christians in America who are called the silent majority. I don't think they're the silent majority. I think they're the silenced majority. And so the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews is not looking for governments to say we stand with Israel. We're looking for the people to say we stand with Israel. And that's the voice that we represent on the ground every day. We represent your listeners, the people who say, I'm not waiting for the government to stand with Israel. I'm going to take a stand myself. And so we're that cumulative voice on the ground in Israel to tell the people of Israel, you're not alone through these life-saving projects like building bomb shelters, giving food aid, building soup kitchens in the war zone. The message of all of this is not just feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and sheltering the poor. It's also saying you are not alone to the people of Israel.
You know, your father deserves a lot of credit here. It was his idea, as I've done my my work on this, and I've really looked into him. I wish I'd gotten to know him and meet him. I mean, it was his idea to build this alliance with Christians and Jews because so much in common, both in terms of alliance and both in terms of the people who really attack Christians and Jews and their faith and so forth. And I think he'd be very proud of you. I think he'd be very proud of what this organization has become. It's very, very important, ladies and gentlemen, that you can support this organization because they're doing so much for our faith, so much for the state of Israel, so much to help the people there. And the good news is the gift is tax deductible. International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. You can go to ifcj.org, ifcj.org. They need your help more than ever. They can never have enough resources to do what they need to do. It's very, very important. Anything that you can afford, again, it's tax deductible. And it's always an honor and a great pleasure, number one, to have this fantastic partnership in our podcast with Yael. Always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. And to partner with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. It's a great honor.
You are an inspiration, not only to the people in America and around the world, but to the people in Israel. So keep on spreading your light, spreading your message, and thank you to everyone for taking a part in this really strong and I believe relevant time where Israel and America have to stand together. Jews and Christians have to stand together. For the first time in history, we're recognizing, finally, we're on the same side. So thank you so much, Mark.
And you folks have done a lot to do that. God bless and be safe. Take care, my friend.
To learn more about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, visit ifcj.org.